Imagine living for nearly a millennium, witnessing the birth of civilization, the rise of the first cities, the evolution of language and writing. Now imagine watching all this progress slowly corrupt as wickedness grows in the hearts of men. This is not a fictional story. It is the account of Methuselah, the man who, according to scripture, lived for 969 years. Our journey begins in the year 687, after the creation of the world, according to biblical chronology. The air was filled with anticipation when Enoch, a man known for his extraordinary devotion, awaited the birth of his firstborn. The world was still young, with only a few generations having passed since Adam and Eve. At that time, the planet was vastly different from what we know today. Theories suggest that a vapor canopy surrounded the Earth, creating a global greenhouse effect that provided a uniform climate, shielding it from harmful radiation. This could be one of the reasons for the extraordinary longevity of the antediluvian patriarchs. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. We post videos like this almost every day, so let's get started. When Methuselah was born, the world was in a state of transition. The stories of creation and the fall were still living memories, passed down from father to son. Humanity was in its early stages of development, exploring and populating a still virgin land, full of mysteries. From his early days, Methuselah was immersed in an environment of deep spirituality. His father, Enoch, was known for his closeness to the divine. The Bible tells us in Genesis 5:22, "And Enoch walked with God after he begot Methuselah 300 years. This walk with God was not a vague metaphor, but a description of an intimate and tangible communion with the divine. Imagine the young Methuselah, growing up under the guidance of a father who would regularly disappear for days or weeks, only to return with eyes gleaming with divine revelation. What kind of stories did Enoch share? What heavenly knowledge did he pass on to his son? As Methuselah grew, so did the world around him. The first cities began to emerge, slowly expanding centers of civilization. Metallurgy took its first steps, with men learning to forge increasingly sophisticated tools and weapons. Music, that universal language of the soul, gained form and complexity. But along with progress, Methuselah also witnessed the first seeds of corruption being sown. Greed began to manifest in trade. Envy poisoned relationships that were once harmonious. Lust distorted what should have been sacred. At 65 years old, still young by the standards of the time, Methuselah was likely already a man of considerable wisdom and experience. He had absorbed his father's teachings and closely observed the changing world around him. It was at this age that he himself became a father. The birth of Lamech, when Methuselah was 187 years old, marked the beginning of a new phase in his life. The name Lamech, meaning powerful, carried a weight of expectation. Was this son the fulfillment of some unrecorded prophecy, or simply a reflection of Methuselah's hopes for the future? As he raised his son, Methuselah continued to observe the changes in the world. Violence, once sporadic, became increasingly common. Corruption spread like a silent plague, infecting entire communities. It was as if a slow, inexorable shadow was stretching across the earth, swallowing the light that had once shone so brightly. It was in this increasingly dark setting that, at 369 years old, Methuselah experienced a profound and mysterious loss. His father, Enoch, simply vanished. The Bible records the event enigmatically, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Genesis 5:24. Imagine the impact of this event on Methuselah's life. His father, his spiritual anchor, his direct link to the divine, was simply gone. There was no funeral, no body to bury, only the certainty that God had taken him. What did this mean? Where had Enoch gone, and why was he chosen for this unique fate? Enoch's disappearance marked a turning point in Methuselah's life. Now, as the eldest patriarch of his lineage, he bore the weight of responsibility. It was his duty to preserve and transmit the knowledge and faith of his ancestors. But how could he do this in a world that seemed to drift further and further from the divine ways? Centuries passed, and Methuselah saw generations born, live, and die. He became a living repository of history and wisdom, a tangible link between the distant past and the troubled present. His extraordinary longevity made him a figure of reverence and mystery. Imagine the stories Methuselah could tell. He had known his great-grandfather Jared, who in turn had known Seth, the son of Adam. Through these connections, Methuselah had access to first-hand accounts of creation, the Garden of Eden, and the fall of humanity. What revelations did he keep? What secrets of the dawn of creation did he carry with him? At 587 years old, Methuselah witnessed the birth of his grandson, Noah. This name, meaning rest or comfort, carried with it a prophecy. Lamech said, "He will comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." Genesis 5:29. What did Lamech see in his newborn son that led him to make such a declaration? Was it a divine revelation? Or perhaps Methuselah, with his vast wisdom, had perceived something special in this grandson and shared his intuition with Lamech. As Noah grew, Methuselah watched with increasing concern the state of the world. The wickedness of men had reached unprecedented levels. Violence was rampant, and the earth was filled with corruption. Genesis 6:11. The biblical text gives us a grim view of this period. And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6:5. What horrors must Methuselah have witnessed for such a judgment to be pronounced? What acts of cruelty, what depths of depravity did he see unfold around him? And how did he, a man who had walked so closely with God for so long, cope with this reality? It was in this context of growing moral darkness that God revealed to Noah his plans for a flood that would cleanse the earth. Methuselah, now over 900 years old, must have felt the weight of this revelation. He had lived for nearly a millennium, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, and now he was about to see the end of an era. Imagine the conversations Methuselah must have had with Noah during this time. What advice did he give his grandson as he prepared for the greatest catastrophe the world had ever known? What stories of the distant past did he share, hoping that this knowledge would not be lost in the floodwaters? Methuselah's final years were marked by an atmosphere of urgency and preparation. As Noah built the ark, Methuselah likely helped with his vast experience and knowledge. He was a living link to the world before corruption, a witness to humanity's degradation, and now an assistant in preparing for a new beginning. The construction of the ark must have been an extraordinary sight. A massive vessel being built on dry land, far from any significant body of water. People must have mocked and ridiculed Noah and his family. And Methuselah, how did he react to these provocations? Did he try to warn people of the imminent judgment, or did he, weary after centuries of witnessing human degradation, simply watch in silence? As the deadline for the flood approached, Methuselah must have reflected on his long life. He had seen so much, experienced so much. Born in a time of relative innocence, he had witnessed the slow but relentless decline of humanity. What thoughts went through his mind as he contemplated the imminent end of the world he knew? Jewish tradition suggests that Methuselah died just 7 days before the flood began. If this is true, his death truly marked the end of an era. He was the last link to the antediluvian world, the last representative of a time when men lived for centuries and walked in close communion with God. In his final moments, what did Methuselah see? Did he have a vision of the future, a glimpse of the post-flood world? Or perhaps, in his last moments, he relived the most significant moments of his nearly 1,000-year life? The flood came, just as God had promised. The waters covered the earth, wiping out the civilization that Methuselah had known for nearly a millennium. But through his grandson Noah, Methuselah's lineage, and with it, the divine promise, survived. The story of Methuselah is more than just an account of extraordinary longevity. It is a testimony to divine patience, a reminder of the fragility of human civilization, and a warning about the consequences of moral corruption. Methuselah lived through ages, witnessing more sunrises and sunsets than we can imagine. He carried with him the memories of a world that was washed from the pages of history, a world that only he and a few others knew in its entirety. His life challenges us to consider our own mortality and the legacy we leave behind. In a world where life expectancy rarely exceeds a century, the story of a man who lived for nearly a millennium makes us wonder, what would we do with all that time? Methuselah's longevity also raises intriguing questions about the antediluvian world. What was this world that allowed humans to live for so long? Some theories suggest that the vapor canopy surrounding the Earth not only created an ideal climate, but also filtered harmful radiation, slowing the aging process. Others speculate that the temporal proximity to creation meant that the human genetic code had not yet accumulated the mutations that would eventually shorten our lifespan. Whatever the explanation, Methuselah's life remains a fascinating mystery, an enigma that challenges our modern understanding of aging and mortality. It is important to note that Methuselah's story does not exist in isolation. It is part of a larger narrative, a complex tapestry of events that, according to Judeo-Christian tradition, shaped the course of human history. Methuselah lived in a time of giants and heroes, a time when, according to the Bible, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Genesis 6:2. He witnessed the rise of the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Genesis 6:4. Who were these sons of God and Nephilim? Some interpretations suggest they were fallen angels who mingled with humanity, producing a race of hybrid beings. Others argue they were simply powerful and influential men. Whatever the truth, Methuselah lived in a world very different from ours, a world of wonders and horrors that we can barely imagine. As Methuselah grew older, he must have become a near mythical figure to the younger generations. The impact of his stories, recounting a world that existed hundreds of years before, describing people and events long forgotten by others, must have been profound. Perhaps Methuselah was one of the few who still remembered what the world was like before wickedness had spread so extensively. He could tell tales of a time when communion with God was more direct, when the memory of Eden was still fresh in humanity's collective mind. In his later years, Methuselah likely saw himself as a guardian of the past, a living repository of knowledge and wisdom accumulated over nearly a millennium. He carried with him not only his own experiences, but also the stories passed down by his father, Enoch, who walked with God. It is fascinating to consider what Methuselah may have witnessed in terms of human development. He saw the birth of civilization, the rise of the first cities, the development of agriculture and livestock. Perhaps he even witnessed the early forms of writing being developed. Throughout his nearly 1,000-year life, Methuselah likely saw countless technological innovations. He may have seen the invention of the wheel, the development of pottery, and the refinement of weaving techniques. Every new discovery, every technological advancement must have been a source of wonder and perhaps concern. As the flood approached, Methuselah must have felt the weight of being one of the last witnesses to a world about to disappear. His final days were likely marked by a mix of sorrow for what was about to be lost and hope for what would come after. It's possible to imagine Methuselah spending his last days sharing his stories and knowledge with those who would enter the ark. He may have seen this as his final chance to preserve the memory of the world he had known, a world soon to be washed away by the floodwaters. What stories would he choose to tell? Perhaps tales of the early days of creation, passed down from generation to generation, or maybe memories of his own father, Enoch, and his mysterious departure. He may have shared practical knowledge about farming, construction, and medicine, wisdom accumulated over nearly a millennium that could aid in the rebuilding of the post-flood world. Methuselah's death, just days before the flood began, marked the end of an era. With him died the last direct link to the world as it had been in the early days of creation. His death symbolized the closing of a chapter in human history. Yet through his grandson Noah and Noah's family, Methuselah's legacy continued. His stories, his experiences, his wisdom, all of this was carried through the floodwaters in the ark, ready to form the foundation of a new beginning for humanity. Methuselah's story reminds us that our lives, no matter how long or short, are part of a greater narrative. Each of us has a role to play, a story to tell, a legacy to leave behind. Methuselah lived for 969 years, longer than any other human recorded in history, but it is not the duration of his life that makes it extraordinary. It is what he did with that time, the experiences he gathered, the wisdom he gained and shared. His story challenges us to consider how we are using our own time, what kind of legacy we are building, what stories we are creating to be told by future generations. In a world that often seems to be racing towards destruction, Methuselah's story reminds us of God's patience and humanity's resilience. It encourages us to take a long-term view, to consider not just the immediate present, but the impact of our actions over the years and decades. Methuselah's life also raises fascinating questions about the nature of time and memory. What would it be like to live for nearly a millennium? How would our perception of time change? Would we be able to clearly remember events from centuries past, or would our oldest memories become hazy, as happens to us after just a few decades? And what effect would this longevity have on our relationships? Methuselah saw generations of descendants born and die. He lived at the same time as his great-great-grandson Noah. How would this affect family dynamics? How does one maintain meaningful emotional connections when most people live only a fraction of your own life? Moreover, Methuselah's story makes us question the nature of wisdom and knowledge. With nearly 1,000 years of experience, what unique insights into life and the universe would Methuselah have developed? What profound understandings about human nature, the cycles of history, and the very fabric of reality might he have reached? Yet despite all this wisdom, Methuselah was unable to stop the moral corruption that led to the flood. This prompts reflection on the limits of human knowledge, the inevitability of certain historical patterns, and the interplay of free will and destiny. The story of Methuselah also invites us to reflect on the meaning and purpose of life. If we had 969 years to live, what would we do with that time? What goals would we pursue? What legacy would we seek to leave behind? And perhaps more importantly, Methuselah's story challenges us to consider how we are using the time we have, whether it's long or short. Are we living in a way that will make a difference? Are we building something that will endure beyond ourselves? As the waters of the flood rose, sweeping away the world Methuselah knew, his legacy survived. Through the stories passed down to Noah and his family, through the lineage that would eventually lead to Abraham, to David, and according to Christian tradition, to Jesus, the impact of Methuselah's life continued to reverberate through the millennia. And so, the story of Methuselah remains with us today, a testament to the complexity of human existence, a reminder of the brevity and preciousness of life, and an invitation to live our own lives with purpose and meaning, no matter how many years we are granted. Perhaps the deepest lesson of Methuselah's life is the importance of living with intention and purpose. Every day is an opportunity to make a difference, to leave a positive mark on the world. We don't need 969 years to create a lasting impact. We just need to use the time we have wisely. So, as the waters of the flood subside and a new world emerges, Methuselah's story continues to inspire and challenge us. It reminds us that every life, no matter how long or short, has the potential to shape the course of history, and it invites us to live each day with the wisdom, courage, and long-term vision that Methuselah must have possessed. May we, like Methuselah, be bridges between the past and the future, guardians of ancient wisdom and pioneers of a better future. May we live in such a way that, when our own story comes to an end, we will have left the world a little better than we found it. The story of Methuselah, the man who lived 969 years, continues to echo through the millennia, reminding us of the power of a single well-lived life and challenging us to make the most of the time we are given. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you next time.